Hi guys, and welcome back for chapter 4 of Leroy Ninker Saddles Up by Kate D. Camillo. So last week we read that Leroy Ninker had his horse Maybelline, and she learned the three most important rules about Maybelline. Rule number 1, she needs lots of compliments. Rule number 2, she eats a lot. And rule number 3, she gets very lonely, so you have to pay attention to her. This week, the decoding strategy we are going to work on is taking off the endings. So that means we're going to be looking for words that have an ending on them, such as, so if you look at the word compliments, we can see we've got this S ending. So taking off the ending means I want to ignore the ending and try and figure out what the main word is, and then I can add the ending back on. So there are a few pretty common endings that we know. So we know ing. We see that one all the time. ing says ing. There are a lot. S is an ending that happens a lot. And ed or d happens a lot. Okay, and if we run into any more endings that you see a lot, I will underline them for you. And let's get into it. So if you want to, as I'm reading, you can keep track of the endings that we go over and see which one happens the most often. I'd be interested to see which ending we read the most of. And you can do this while you guys are reading later on as well. As you're reading a book, look for those endings and see which ones pop up all the time. Okay, so let's get started. And when we get to a word with an ending, I will underline it. And if it's a tricky word, then I'm going to show you how to take off that ending and then put it back on to solve. Okay. Chapter 4. Leroy Ninker held on tight. He thought of more pretty words and he said them. So I see S. Okay, so we've got words. He thought of more pretty words and he said them. Sweetness, said the cowboy. And I see this word has an ly ending. So I'm going to take that ending off to help me solve this word. Okay, so there's that ly ending. I'm going to ignore that for a second. And if I pretend that this isn't here, I know this word, right? That word is love. And ly says lee, so lovely. Sweetness, said the cowboy, lovely one, beloved. The horse went. And here's another one. ER, we didn't talk about that one. ER happens a lot too. So if I take off that ER, I know this word, right? Faster. The horse went faster. Maybelline of my dreams, shout Ed. Take off that ending, and I know shout Ed. Leroy Ninker. The world was a green and gold blur, and Leroy was happier than he ever had been in his life. Maybelline ran and ran and ran. The horse ran until the sun was low in the sky, and the shadows were long and sad. Maybelline, said Leroy into Maybelline's left ear. It is time for the two of us to head home. Maybelline, ooh, this one's tricky. So I see, you know what's interesting? I see two endings here. I see ed, which we've already done. We talked about ed. But I also see another one that we've done too. I see er. So it's almost like this word kind of has a double ending. So if I take those off for a second, then I've got this. And I know this is, I recognize that as a name. So it says nickered. So Maybelline nickered. She slowed down to a trot, and then she stopped. Oh, I see an ly ending. So if I take off that ly ending, I have entirely. So I'm using a couple different, I broke this into different parts. Entirely. And then she stopped entirely. Leroy Ninker slid forward in the saddle. Giddy up, my beautiful one, said Leroy, but Maybelline held still. Yippee-i-yo, my beloved, said Leroy. We are homeward bound. Maybelline looked to the left, and she looked to the right. She let out a long whinny. Oh, said Leroy, I get it. He slid off Maybelline's back. He took hold of the reins. Come on, horse of my heart, he said. I will show you the way home. That makes sense. She didn't know how to get home because she doesn't know where they're going. Leroy walked ahead, and Maybelline followed behind, and every once in a while she would give Leroy a, don't know, let's take the ending off this one, friendly little bump with her nose, pushing him forward. And in this way the cowboy and his horse made their way home through the deepening purple dusk. Home was the Garden Glen Apartments, Unit 12. Unit 12 was a very small apartment, which was just fine because Leroy was a very small man. Maybelline, however, was not a small horse. She was a tall horse, and she was a wide horse, and she would not fit through the door of Unit 12. Gol dang it, said Leroy Ninker. He gave Maybelline a little push, and when that didn't work, he gave her a large shove. But Leroy soon saw that it was impossible. All the, shoving, all the shoving in the world was not going to make Maybelline fit through the door of Unit 12. Dag belibber it, said Leroy. He actually felt like he might cry, which was ridiculous because cowboys definitely did not cry. Leroy closed his eyes, and Patty Lamarck's face floated into view. She opened her mouth and said, Cogitate on item 1 if you care for her to move forward, Hank. You gotta compliment the heck out of her. Leroy opened his eyes. He cleared his throat. He said, Maybelline, you are the best, squeeziest into a small spot horse I have ever known. Maybelline twitched her ears to the left and to the right, and while the horse was busy savoring the compliment, Leroy gave her a hopeful shove. But Maybelline still wouldn't fit through the door. Flibber gibber it, said Leroy. He closed his eyes and conjured up Patty Lamarck's face again. He tried to remember the other items about Maybelline. He thought very hard. I got it, he said. Item 2 is that you are the kind of horse who eats a lot of grub. Leroy opened his eyes. Maybelline was looking at him in an extremely hopeful manner. Well, yippee-i-okay, said Leroy Ninker. I will make us some food, and then we will deal with this too small door. Maybelline looked as overjoyed as it was possible for a horse to look, and Leroy was moved to compliment her again. You are the most splendiferous horse in all of creation, he said. Maybelline whinnied long and loud. She nodded in agreement. She truly was an excellent horse. Leroy didn't think he would ever be done admiring her. All right, guys, so when we read that, we saw a lot of endings. We saw a lot of ED. We saw a lot of LY. We saw a lot of S. And we saw a lot of ING endings. So those are some endings that you can look for as you guys are reading. And if you see one of these endings at the end of a word, you can just break that ending right off and solve the first part of the word and then put the ending back on in order to help you figure it out. Okay, so as you're reading this week, go ahead and use that decoding strategy. And I am super excited to see what happens next week. I wonder if Maybelline's going to get through the door. I wonder what Maybelline is going to eat. We'll find out.